do like ants. We'll argue about that film later. Katzenberg denies this. Katzenberg did, however, push Prince of Egypt to December. Disney countered by moving Mighty Joe Young to the same month. So in June of 1998...
Is that the gorilla movie?
Yes. Katzenberg pulled a surprise attack by announcing a decision he'd actually made months earlier. Ants, publicly slated for a June 1999 release, was pulled into October of 1998.
That's a lot.
7-8 months ahead of schedule, a month ahead of A Bug's Life. Another...
Such a dick move.
So petty. So petty. Key to our story is that the completion of Ants and the delay of Shrek freed up Pacific Data Images, if you guys remember, PDI, the company that DreamWorks had bought a 40% stake in, resources for Shrek. In fact, one of the Ants directors, Eric Darnell, joined Shrek as a storyboard artist, and we'll get to his contributions in a little bit. While Katzenberg and Disney continued to duel, both at the box office and in the courtroom, remember, Katzenberg is also suing Disney and Michael Eisner for breach of contract.
Yep, suing the crap out of them.
Absolutely. Suing the pants off of the inspiration for Lord Farquaad right now. Directors Andrew Adamson and Vicki Jensen learned, largely on the fly, how to direct a 3D animated film. Now, Jensen had come from the world of 2D animation. She had to learn how to conceptualize a camera in 3D space for the first time and visualize objects prior to fully being rendered. As she later said, quote, "My first days directing up north, I'm sitting in a darkened room with all these heads behind me, and they show a gray log. And they say, 'What do you think about this log?' And I'm like, 'It needs bark?' And they go, 'Well, that comes later. That comes in lighting and surfacing. But what do you think about the shape of it?' And I'm like, 'It'll do.'" End quote. Jensen and Adamson were also learning how to work together. Jensen described the division of labor in an interview from 2021. Quote, "I know on Prince of Egypt, for instance, they had a director that worked with just the story and another director that worked more with animation. Both of us really wanted to do everything and work with each department and really direct the movie, so we broke it up into sequences. A sequence would be everything that happens in one location. The opening of the movie with Shrek's walk and the credits, the gingerbread man sequence, so we divided the movie up that way," end quote. Apparently, her first sequence was them escaping the castle after they'd saved Princess Fiona and the dragon is chasing them out of the castle, which is a literal trial by fire for your first sequence on this movie.
Yeah, that's a lot going on.
So it was likely around this time that screenwriters Joe Stillman of Beavis and Butthead Do America and Roger Schulman, a very accomplished TV writer who had also written 1995's Balto. Did you see Balto, Lizzie?
Of course I saw Balto.
Balto's great.
I loved Balto. He has to save those children from diphtheria.
From being unvaccinated. Yes.
That's right.
Yeah. It's a great combination, I think, too. Beavis and Butthead Do America and then the earnestness of Balto. It's a little bit of what Shrek is. So
yeah,
they were brought onto the project. There are conflicting sources regarding when Elliot and Rossio's involvement. That's the last screenwriters, not the two original screenwriters who'd penned Aladdin.
Right, the Pirates of the Caribbean guys.
Exactly. Suffice it to say, they did leave at a certain point, and these other two writers were brought on. According to storyboard artist Cody Cameron, the catalyst for the story's final tone and the meta riff on fairy tale characters as a whole came from the development and inspiration of one specific scene. Lizzie, if you had to guess which scene they stumbled on, it's a small moment, and it's in the first act of the film that kind of set the tone for all of the fairy tale irreverence. What would you guess?
The mirror?
That's a great guess, because that's one of the scenes that they were obviously doing a big riff on, and it's very similar to this.
The mice? The mirror, the mice.
Okay, I'll tell you. Do you know the Muffin Man?
The Muffin Man?
The Muffin Man.
Okay.
The interrogation of the gingerbread man.
Yes, which I love.
So Conrad Vernon, for his part, credits the story team for cracking the scene. However, he is the one who pitched the scene with the voice to Andrew Adamson and producer Aaron Warner and left the two, quote, literally just crying with laughter, end quote. They took it to Katzenberg. Again, they had Conrad Vernon, a storyboard artist, perform the scene for Jeffrey Katzenberg. And Katzenberg goes, quote, "This is exactly the type of humor," end quote.
Nice.
Now, that is Conrad Vernon's voice in the movie, the storyboard artist.
That's awesome.
So his performance was so good that he actually went on to voice the character in the film. And he said, quote, "They tried for about 2 months to find actors to replace me, but they finally said, screw it. We can't find anyone. Can you do it?" Now, the question is, where did he get that voice, Lizzie? And I would like to play a little clip for you.
I know.
You do?
I have an idea.
I don't know if you know.
Okay.
The gingerbread man was probably the funniest character of all to me that came out of the Shrek movies. Where did the voice come from? Like where inside of you did you hear that voice?
Did you ever babysit one of those kids that wears like, they're like 8 and they wear open-toed sandals and pink shorts and they're just a little off?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
You know,
They look like boarding school rejects.
We took him to dinner one night when we were babysitting him, and he gets out of the car and he's got his dad's shoes on, and we're like, "What the fuck are you doing with your dad's shoes on?" He goes, "My dad said someday I'd fill his shoes." And so that voice, we used to do that voice. "For Christmas, I'd like 3 gallons of rose milk cream." And so that was just the voice I put into the gingerbread man.
God.
And yes, that is
Okay.
Harlan Williams.
Well, that's great, but I have to say my theory was Mickey Mouse. It sounds
does sound-
so much like Mickey Mouse.
It does sound like Mickey Mouse. And it's entirely plausible that around the office, because they're riffing on Disney, that they decided to do that.
I'll buy the
The special child.
gifted child.
Now, Shrek, in this irreverent satire of fairy tales, had truly found its rhythm. And it seems like the advantage it had is that it was all of these non-Disney weirdos, plus some ex-Disney defectors in Silicon Valley who were working together on riffing on Disney. So they had no reverence for Hollywood and the establishment, and all they wanted to do was take the piss out of it. And so, again, director Vicki Jensen later said, quote, "Honestly, a lot of the job is just recognizing genius and making sure that you just get rid of the weeds that are in the way and hang on to that genius. The comedy gold that if it threw you on your ass laughing in storyboard when it was first pitched, you have to protect that," end quote. Now, much like The Emperor's New Groove, and I'm quite certain so many animated films we will cover, the ideas are just coming from everyone at this point. Andrew Adamson, for his part, pushed the story team to add more and more fairy tale characters. As producer Penny Finkelman-Cox said, he recognized that his real creative geniuses were around him. He was the one that zeroed in on the Conrad, Chris, and Cody grouping and pulled them into the process. He found comedy through the artists. The beauty of that movie is Andrew Adamson getting all the board artists to do the best they could have ever done with him as the guiding light, end quote. So again, to show how much the storyboard artists are contributing, artist Chris Miller provided the scratch track voiceover for The Magic Mirror, as you mentioned, Lizzie. So the whole original pitch was the dating show game that they do.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the film's lewdest jokes, when it says she hangs out with 7 short men, but she's not easy.
Yes.
Very risque. His voice was so good that it was also kept in the film. And Cody Cameron voiced Pinocchio and the 3 Little Pigs.
Oh, nice.
So not only did they do that, a number of these artists went on to do vocal performances in the other Shrek movies, as well as other animated films in general. So they kind of became voice actors as a result of this. They also contributed dialogue as writers, and it is Vicki Jensen who credits PDI director Eric Darnell, who just directed Ants, who joined the team, as I mentioned, as a storyboard artist, with the Duloc welcome song performed by the Clockwork Dolls. Make sure you wipe your face.
Yeah.
So that, as the kind of like riff on Disneyland, you know, came from him. Interestingly, the fairy tale characters in the end, while being an obvious jab at Disney, were not part of the original script or Katzenberg's original vision for the movie. Similarly, the fact that Duloc looks like Disneyland was more a happy accident, or a result of so many of the animators being former Disney employees. Art director Guillaume Aretos, or Artos, as my French brother-in-law says might be correct, who also voiced one of the Merry Men, said, Jeffrey Katzenberg looked at the images we made and said, "That's exactly Disneyland. Go for it. That's even more fun. Push it."
Jeffrey Katzenberg, just really an edgelord in terms of Shrek.
You know, I spoke to an employee that worked at PDI during
Whoa, an inside source.
an inside source. They very graciously reached out and spoke to me about their time on the movie. And they said, first of all, that it was an incredible amount of fun. They said it was very stressful because it was a tight crunch, and we'll get to why. And they also said that, yes, Katzenberg is a bit domineering and he is this larger than life presence. But they also said he's a freaking genius when it comes to animated films. And he could come into a room and look at a wall of boards and say, "You don't need these 4, and you need to add 2 here." And everyone would say, "Yeah, I think he's right." All right. The team had been slogging for years and it seems had finally found some fun and momentum, but they still needed an ogre who could fill the void that Chris Farley had left at the heart of this production. Now, Lizzie, in the mid-1990s, Canadian Mike Myers needed a break. Despite a successful run on Saturday Night Live from 1989 to 1995, again, overlapping with Farley for 5 seasons, and a mega hit with 1992's Wayne's World,
Yes.
which we will cover because it had a difficult production, Myers was extremely burned out. He had lost his father just before the release of Wayne's World. During that production, he clashed heavily with the film's director, Penelope Spheris. He had had perhaps an even more contentious relationship with Tommy Schlamme,
Yeah,
the director of his next film, 1993's So I Married an Axe Murderer.
which I enjoy. Yes.
I did too, but that movie did not do well at the box office. And Wayne's World 2, also released in 1993, failed to capture the zeitgeist in the way the first had, grossing less than $50 million against a $40 million budget. Myers, after the release of Wayne's World 2, took a 2-year hiatus from film and returned only when inspiration struck. And Lizzie, do you remember what inspiring film he returned with? Oh, yeah.
Yes, Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery, which is just an absolute classic.
It is 1997's parody of the Bond genre and Blow Up
Yes.
and others. Was not an overnight sensation. It did well at the box office, but it was a bona fide smash on home video.
That makes sense because obviously we were too young to have seen that in theaters, but I think I saw it shortly thereafter
I did as well.
at home.
Yes.
And we just watched it all the time.
It was one of those movies that became endlessly quotable, and
Yes.
it was that organic memification of it, so to speak, that led to a very successful home video run. So Adamson and Jensen, as a result, were fans, but according to Jensen, Myers was not exactly a shoo-in for the part because despite his successes, he was not a star at the caliber or name recognition level of a Chris Farley.
Yeah.
And even, for example, with something like Austin Powers, he's playing characters. So his name is not the name the audience is necessarily leaving with. Wayne's World, it's Wayne. And in Austin Powers, obviously it's Austin Powers. And he's playing a number of characters.
He also looks so different across all of his roles. He had a habit of obviously wearing a lot of, prosthetics, makeup, wigs, and everything. So yeah, it is very different from Chris Farley, who tended to play a very similar character across everything.
That's right. As Vicki Jensen told the New York Times, quote, "It kind of took a little selling to the studio because he was still breaking in, but he wasn't the huge name he is now," end quote. Now, one name that we can confirm that the studio was reportedly interested in was Nicolas Cage.
What?
Yeah. According to an interview with producer Aaron Warner, Cage came in to meet about the role. I'm guessing this must have been shortly after the kind of face-off The Rock, Cage as action star run of films.
Yes. Okay.
Quote, "Well, after Chris Farley passed, we, were scrambling to figure out how to make it, who to make it with. So I think Nick was one of the people who came in to talk about it," end quote. So that is confirmed by producer Aaron Warner. There was a lot of speculation online about who else came in for the role, and I can confirm that name. Despite being the smaller name, Myers was perhaps the more obvious creative choice.
Perhaps.
Yeah, it does seem that Cage was the one who declined the offer based on the secondary sources I read. He's turned down a number of enormous roles, to be fair, so that's entirely possible. Myers and Farley had, of course, worked together on Saturday Night Live. Myers later said that when Del Close, obviously writer, actor, coach to many comedians who passed through SNL, introduced him to Farley, he called him, quote, a kindred spirit, meaning he felt that their senses of humor would obviously align. Myers said, quote, the second I saw him, I thought he was going to be a giant star, end quote. And he was right. By August of 1998, though, Mike Myers replaced Chris Farley and was officially cast as Shrek. So this is roughly 9 months after Chris Farley passed away.
And sorry, Austin Powers was 97, so like less than a year before this?
Exactly, summer of 97.
Okay.
So my understanding is the movie is released. I'm sure the creative team is aware of it, but Chris Farley has not yet passed away. Farley passes away in December. The movie probably went out on VHS around that time. And the momentum built, you know what I mean, across 98.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's my interpretation. Now, Eddie Murphy remained on as the one original cast member to stay on to the production as Donkey, which brilliant casting.
Yes.
Cameron Diaz replaced Janine Garofalo as Princess Fiona, and John Lithgow, who I adore in this movie,
It's wonderful.
rounded out things as Lord Farquaad. According to storyboard artist Tom Cito, William Shatner was also in consideration for Farquaad.
I mean, that would have been incredible. It would have been very funny.
Lithgow has some fun interviews you can watch where he discusses the production and going to visit the animators. And he seems like a very fun person to be around.
Yeah.
Very dry sense of humor.
Also funny because he's very tall.
He is very tall. John Lithgow. Eddie Murphy, of course, had just done an animated role, Mushu in Disney's Mulan.
Yeah.
You guys remember? Cameron Diaz, for her part, was coming off of the Farrelly Brothers hit There's Something About Mary. She was blowing up as well. Not a...
I want to be clear.
She's great.
Very funny
Yeah.
in that movie. She's great in
She
that
is.
movie. I love Cameron Diaz.
Yeah.
That
I still
movie.
like that movie. It holds a place in my heart. It was such a...
Good.
It was an important film to
I'm
me
glad.
at the time. All right. So
I don't want to know
We'll
why.
talk later. Some hair issues. So in late 1998, with a fresh cast in hand, the Shrek team goes full CGI, embarking on a trial and error journey through what would become the most ambitious 100% computer animated film of its time. Now, the reason is, unlike Toy Story, as we've discussed, or even Ants, they are doing things like hair and skin and mud and water.
And I want to point out this remains a difficult thing with CGI, VFX, and animation. We talked about it in Twilight, that it's very hard when you're dealing with fur and skin in particular.
Yep. So, with Pacific Data Images fully engaged, they set out to make a fairy tale world that was rooted in reality, but not photorealistic, which is a really tricky balance to find.
Yeah, because you don't want to wind up in the Polar Express situation.
I think they really avoid it in this movie for the most part. And yeah, Polar Express, which has some wonderful animation in it, but it does unfortunately sit pretty squarely in the uncanny valley when it comes to digital representations of people on screen. According to Katzenberg, human characters were really challenging. So the fairy tale characters were easier. Obviously, fur is very difficult, but the fairy tale characters were easier. Katzenberg specifically said of Princess Fiona's character, quote, our artists were able to do something that was almost photorealistic, but it was actually too good. And so we really had to dial her back to make Fiona fit inside the fairy tale world, because when she got too realistic, she really looked out of place in it. So here's a place where technology allowed us to achieve something that, if we went to the full extent of its potential, actually became incongruous with the look of the film itself, end quote.
Interesting.
This podcast is supported by Progressive, a leader in boat insurance. Welcome aboard to Carefree Boating. Here we don't worry about the what-ifs because we explore with Progressive Boat Insurance for as little as $100 per year for a basic liability policy. Progressive also offers a variety of other coverages and can help you cover repair costs when you need it. And with discounts like multi-policy, safety courses, responsible driver, and more, your mind can really float free. Cruise on over to Progressive.com to get a quote today and see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Rate and discounts not available in all states or situations.
With Audible, there's more to imagine when you listen. Whether you listen to stories, motivation, expert advice, any genre you love, you can be inspired to imagine new worlds, new possibilities, new ways of thinking. And Audible makes it easy to be inspired and entertained as a part of your everyday routine, without needing to set aside extra time. As an Audible member, you choose one title a month to keep from their ever-growing catalog. Be inspired to explore your inner creativity with Viola Davis's memoir, Finding Me. Find what piques your imagination with Audible. New members can try Audible free for 30 days. Visit audible.com/imagine or text IMAGINE to 500-500. That's audible.com/imagine or text IMAGINE to 500-500.
Everyone has moments in life they can't just stop thinking about. They can be embarrassing things, like that one time you face planted in front of a group of teenagers, or something amazing like the first time you hosted your family for the holidays. And on Baby, This is Keke Palmer, hosted by me, Keke Palmer, and presented by BMW, we know to savor the good memories and let go of the bad. And one thing everyone remembers fondly is their first time behind the wheel of a BMW. So come join me and BMW this summer as we explore pop culture moments and topics you just can't stop thinking about on Baby, This is Keke Palmer, sponsored by BMW, the ultimate driving machine.
Now, there were many elements that needed to be pioneered: wrinkled, textured skin, fur, fat and muscles, hair, plus a surrounding world that featured dust, leaves, grass, water, mud that moved in a physically plausible way. How did they do it? Well, they did it in the computer, and they also did it in real life. There are many stories you can find online of employees going into the parking lot and dumping mud and water on one another, of them chasing a donkey down on a nearby farm to use as a reference for the film. A lot of it, the early animation days is, let's go into the physical world and see how it acts, and then see if we can imitate it when we get back to our computer screen. They also were able to use some software developed for one thing to present a different thing. For example, the system they developed for Donkey's fur was also used for the grass in the backgrounds. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, Ken Pierce of PDI describes in the making of Shrek how they took existing systems from ants and improved upon them drastically while also developing entirely new proprietary software to bring the film to life. So the film had 14 software developers building the tools that the animators would use, including a facial expression system with 500 controls to animate the face, which was described as akin to puppeteering a marionette. So the idea was to allow the artist to do literally any expression that they could think of with these different points of control on the face. So you'll notice that the skin on the characters really, I think, does not look plasticky. It looks like it has depth as the light is hitting it.
I think the animation in this movie looks great. Like, I understand that it's older. It didn't really look that dated to me.
No, and I think because so much of the story and the humor holds up as well, once you lock in the first 5 minutes, you just don't think about it anymore. And so many of the scenes are just really beautifully rendered, like, and painted. Like her castle.
Oh yeah, the swamp
is gorgeous. I love the design of the dragon that can look fearsome and kind of obviously pear-shaped, but then feminine at the same time.
Yeah.
It's a really, really well done character.
Oh, pear-shaped, rude. She looks great.
That's a compliment. That's my favorite shape. All right.
Okay.
Let's not get into our personal taste here. Now, according to art director Guillaume Aretos, who had experience as a painter, this was an iterative process. As he said, with Fiona, for example, we have a very complex system of dermis, epidermis, and base. So it's working almost like a makeup process. And that is a system also that was applied by Rembrandt. So it's not new. You basically don't paint one color straight. You paint a glaze of red, another of yellow, and then you have a base that reflects light, end quote. Not to say that there weren't mishaps. During one animator's first day on the project, they apparently tweaked an input on Donkey that changed his hair length, and his hair came back so long in all of the rendered scenes that he looked like a chia pet. And you can see some images of that online. Lead character technical director Richard Walsh described how, quote, there's a case where if the animator accidentally goes off the end, meaning goes too high on a value, in the sense that he asks for a shape that's not there, the face of the character blows up, literally. Absolutely blows up. Teeth pop out, the tongue sticks over there, the eyeballs pop out, the whole thing just blows up. So it's kind of freaky, end quote.
It's horrifying.
Right. So they're dealing with new technology for the first time. They're finding these bugs. Cameron Diaz, for her part, was stunned when she saw her character. Quote, the first time I saw it, it was rather eerie because I felt like even though she looks nothing like me, there was something, a quality about her sort of in the eyes that at first I was a little sort of taken aback by. And there were a few gestures that sort of reminded me more of my sister than myself because I can't really see it in myself, but I can see it in my sister, end quote.
She's great in this too.
She is great in this. But it's also interesting to think nobody had seen humans done CGI before. So they're seeing themselves in a weird way, you know what I mean, with their voice applied. It's such a new medium.
Yeah, it's a different like specificity of articulation in terms of what they're able to show.